So we have some goals for our workshop for today. So please keep these in the forefront of your mind as you continue to discuss and work through and listen and participate. First, we want to make sure that we are able to identify and explain how a lack of cultural competency is detrimental to Black and Indigenous people of color or BIPOC people working in science. We want to be sure that we provide the audience with an actionable understanding of the stress the value of cultural competence for the success of BIPOC academics, and provide a space for discussion. And then be sure that we are offering tools and resources for attendees to take action and promote cultural competence in your own settings. So we have some very poignant goals that are actionable as well.
Thanks, Matt. And really to achieve these goals, we have invited and we're joined by two complimentary speakers with expertise in both cultural competency and higher education mentorship. So first up, it's our pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Cory S. Powell. Cory is the Director of Institutional Diversity at Texas Tech University and former director of the Lauro Cavazzo and Orfilio Powell Malone Mentoring Program, also known as Mentor Tech. He's also a Texas Tech alum. He received his bachelor's in music, communication studies, and family studies, as well as his master's at Texas Tech in the interdisciplinary studies of communication, business, and education. So Cory will be speaking to us today with a talk that really encompasses the struggles that are currently going on with culturally competent mentoring and how we can all be better mentors. So please, while Cory is giving his talk, you may type any questions or comments for him in the chat or anonymously in the Padlet link that I'm going to provide in a second. And we'll be reading these questions aloud during the Q&A portion of this session at the Cory's talk. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Cory.
It is a privilege to be with you all on this afternoon. And I want to commend this organization for putting this workshop on, and also I want to commend each of you for taking the time to be here. I'm going to approach it a little differently. I'm not just going to talk to you. I'm going to walk with you. I want to have a conversation. So as I go forward, if you would just think of it as such. Thank you. All right, so hopefully y'all can see my screen. We can go forward from here. So again, thank you for the opportunity. I want to start with just asking a simple question, and that is, what is mentoring? If we were to define mentoring, like, what would come to your mind? And I want you to think through that as we go forward. And a mentor, for the purpose of our conversation, I want you to think along these terms, that a mentor is a trusted counselor or guide. It's a coach or tutor. It's simply a voice of experience. Think of a mentor as being a resource. And all of those things on your screen that exemplify what indeed a resource is. That's source of supply, source of information and expertise, a recourse in difficulty. These are things that I want you to consider as we go forward. I think of mentoring, and this is a definition that we use here and that I used for the years that I directed the Mentor Tech program, which at its height had over 1,100 people in it on an annual basis. And that's that mentoring is this dynamic reciprocal learning relationship in which persons agree to a partnership where they will work collaboratively towards the achievement of mutually defined goals that develop the protege or mentee's skills, abilities, knowledge, and or thinking. That it is dynamic and reciprocal. So it's not one person doing all the work. That it is an exchange, that this is an interactive and ongoing process, a partnership that helps both individuals grow, but specifically working to achieve mutually defined goals that advance the protege's skills, their abilities, their knowledge, their thinking. So let's talk a little bit about the context of culture. And I believe wholeheartedly that an effective mentoring relationship requires that each partner understand the context of the other's culture, because it influences values and strengths, it influences talents and the worldview, and it really helps to determine how they engage interculturally. Okay. And as we think about that, the context is really the circumstances, the conditions, the contributing factors and forces that affect how we connect, how we interact with and learn from one another. In mentoring partnerships, it's important for partners to understand context and differences to avoid making assumptions that can upend the relationship and take it off course. So bringing a full understanding of the fact that we are the sum total of our experiences, our exposures, our encounters, that determines who we are, right? So as we come together, it's understanding that I bring all of me to all of my interactions. Now, you may not see all of me, but all of me is present. I cannot divorce myself from being a Black man. When I walk into a room, you know, I'm a 5'11", heavy-set Black guy, right? And I recognize that when I walk into the room, regardless of people's perceptions or not, that's my reality. I'm a first-generation college student. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I'm a brother. I'm an uncle, right? All of those things come a part of me. And on top of that, I'm a Black man, right? Living in Texas, okay? So all of that is my culture. And every person brings to the table those elements of themselves. So it's very important that as we begin to go forward, we think that. And with that in mind, I must say the struggle is real. So as you think about your BIPOC students, young professionals, understand that there are lots of things going on, lots of layers that are intersecting on an ongoing basis. Some of them are very visible and some of them are not, right? I speak with a lot of students and I'm often told like the imposter syndrome is real, right? The feeling that when I walk into a room, I'm expected to speak for everyone of my ethnic group, my racial identity, like all of that on a regular basis. And one of my colleagues here at Tech says my Black is tired, right? Like I'm exhausted, right? Because I'm on a daily basis trying to navigate the environments that I'm in and being seen as being an effective member of a team, as being competent, as being prepared. And underneath all of that, I live in a world, in a time where for many, the hue of my skin automatically makes me a threat. And so the real struggle of going into an environment, specifically for our students who are from the BIPOC communities going into PWI institutions, that's real. Going into a corporate sector where you are the only person, that's real. Like there are some experiences very unique. Like rarely am I in a place where I'm not the only Black person in the room, specifically in meetings and so forth. So walking in, that's a real thing that's going on. And it's all underneath, but it's there. So I just want to put that out there, that the struggle is real. As mentors, it is our goal, it is our job to be a compass, if you will. That the job is to be there to challenge, the persons that you are mentoring, like to challenge them for purposes of growth, for purposes of professional development, for purposes of expanding horizon. Sometimes it is a matter of confronting. These are the things that I see that have to be confronted. We can't just overlook this. We have to confront that. Sometimes it's helping that protege confront his or her own fears, the avoidance, like admitting that there are real struggles, and at times it's being the person who helps correct some things, right? Corrects perspectives, not to say that they're not valid, but to help them see it broader. Sometimes it's to be that person who is the comforter, to say, I see your struggles, I know it's tough, but you can get through this, right? I've been there too. I often share with mentors the importance of remembering when you were where your protege is. And perhaps you may not have been in their exact experiences, but think about a similar encounter. Think about when you were the new person in the lab. Think of when you were the new person on the team, the new person going into an environment that is different. And then being a champion. And that means speaking up for them. That means correcting misconceptions or perceptions of them that others may have. That means helping to advance them, being deliberately inclusive and bringing them onto teams and giving them exposure. It's giving them an opportunity to experience something that they perhaps never would. I have a former student who shared a wonderful story of working as a White House intern, and in the process, under the Obama administration, working for Valerie Jarrett, and was given a task to help coordinate a large event. And she was graciously, Valerie Jarrett was, in her words, was exceptionally generous to her and gave her exposure and opportunity, which included a meeting where they were discussing the event and the president was present. And when the president asked Mrs. Jarrett for an update, she turned to my former student and said, why don't we let her give it to you? And my student was able to share with the president of the United States what she had done. And she said from that moment on, that week, at least 4 different times, she would run into the president and he would speak to her by name. So you realize how that made that young lady feel, as far as competency, as far as like giving her that, like that person in that moment needed to know that someone sees me and it just happens to be the leader of the free world. So being that compass, challenging, confronting, correcting, comforting, and champion is really what we're asked to do as mentors. And it's not an easy job. I'll just say it's not easy, but it's necessary. I want to give you some things to remember, things that I believe are essential. And certainly we're talking specifically about our BIPOC students, BIPOC young professionals, but I want you to keep in mind that these are things that probably we all have needed at some point or another. There may be some things that are specific to this group, but in general, these are good things to remember. Be open. Expect to learn and grow through this process. Right? Sometimes it's easy to think I am the teacher, you are the student. I am the leader, you are a team member. But the reality is we can learn from everyone. We can grow through these experiences. So if you approach it from that perspective, I think you'll get more than you imagine. I want to urge and encourage you not to approach the relationship through a philanthropic lens. Right? Although we are there to give and to assist and to help grow, there's a switch when it feels like I am in a superior position and I'm like helping someone who's less fortunate, someone who's disadvantaged. And I shared with some members of the planning team that years ago I had a mentor who came to me who stressed that she didn't feel she was doing a great job. And being a mentor to her student, because she came into the relationship expecting to assist a student who was, in her words, disadvantaged, who had never traveled outside of the country, et cetera, et cetera. And in the process, she learned that her protege was more traveled than she, literally was well-read, et cetera, et cetera. And so she was challenged because she couldn't figure out how she could help that student, because the way she approached it was, I'm going to help this disadvantaged student rather than I'm just going to help a student. And through the conversation, she learned that the student was facing some different challenges that she was able to assist that student with, but her approach had to change, her perspective had to change. So be careful not to always think of it from a philanthropic lens or perspective. I encourage you to acknowledge your own implicit biases and work on them. We all have them. Every one of us has those. These things that we automatically go to in our mind. We don't know how, we don't know why, but it's where we go. And when we recognize that, we have to work on it. I'll tell you a story. I'm driving down our loop here in Lubbock. This is years ago. We're probably going 60 miles an hour. And as I'm driving, I look over and there's an elderly Anglo lady driving on the side of me. We make eye contact and she locks her door. And I thought, I'm a pretty bad guy. If I can drive 60 miles an hour, jump out the car and run over and get in her car. Like, whether that was her intentions or not, that's how I perceived it. The look in her eyes suggested I need to be careful from him. We all have these things, these images, these thoughts that are as again, with the sum total of our experiences and our exposures. Sometimes those things have been implanted and are rooted in prejudices that we all have, preferences that we have, but we have to check those. And when we see those show up, we have to be willing to acknowledge that that exists and do the work that's necessary to move beyond it. I would encourage you not to assume that you know what your protege, your mentee needs, but rather to ask them. Because what you might assume, as was the case with the woman I mentioned earlier, was that I have something that I know where she is, I know exactly what she needs, when in actuality that may not be. So going into a new environment, working in a lab, being the only African-American female, that young lady may be in a different space than, say, an African-American male that was in that, or a Latino. Don't also, when we're talking about ethnicities and racial identities, don't assume to know, right? Don't assume, ask the question. I have met individuals who did not want to be called Hispanic, who did not want to be called Latino, didn't want to be called Latinx, they wanted to be called Mexican. At the same time, if I went out and started calling everyone that I perceived to be of a specific ethnic group, if I use that term and just went out and said, I might be offending others. So ask the question, like, what is your preference? How would you like for me? How do you identify? What is the best, how would you like for me to address you? Where do you feel that? Like, there are ways to ask the question, but assuming will lead us through some challenges that we certainly don't want in this case. I encourage you to ask for and give honest feedback to those to whom you're providing mentorship. To ask for and give feedback. Did that make sense? Was that helpful? Did I produce the question that you need? Did I provide the answer you needed? Ask for and give honest feedback. How did I do today? Did I approach that right? If the person is asking, give them, and I think you have to establish a relationship, certainly, because people will show you who they really are if you give them time and if they trust you. You don't start there, but if you, at the very beginning, say, I want this to be a transparent relationship where you can ask for and I can give, and then I can likewise ask for and receive back from you honest feedback. This is huge. Please don't say you're colorblind. Because by saying you're colorblind, you say you don't see a part of who I am. And I know it may be well-intended. Say, oh, I'm not racist. I'm not, that's not me. I don't want you to think, I don't see color. Well, I challenge you on that. As I said, I'm almost 6 foot tall. I'm a dark-skinned Black man. When I walk into a room, it's very hard for me to believe that you don't see my color, right? That's part of who I am. That's part of my identity. I think we must be mindful that we are living in a society and a time where we have much more multi-ethnic individuals, right? Biracial, multiracial individuals. And I know several close friends who share the inner struggle they feel with trying to fit and trying to explain. I'm too dark to be this, I'm too light to be this, I'm too this to be that. Where am I? Like, ask the question of how they identify, and just don't say you don't see. I think that right there will just go a long way in helping you build established relationships. You know, I see you as a person. It's a much better way of saying it than I don't see color. I see your totality. I see you as a whole person. I want to say one is not reflective of all. You meet one Black man, you've met one Black man. We're not monolithic in our thinking and our approaches and our perspectives. Someone who grew up in the Northeast has a different experience typically than someone who grew up in the Deep South, someone from the Pacific Northwest. Within all of our cultures, there's a lot of different things. So I mentioned Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, Mexican, etc. Like there's multiple layers. So one is not reflective of all. Please don't assume. Please don't put everyone in the same category. Just like you don't want someone to say all men are the same, all women are the same, or all microbiologists are the same, or all, but like you don't want that. So everyone has their own identity, and the challenge often is you're in the classroom, you're in the lab, you're in these experiences where you have to speak on behalf of everybody, which is taxing, and it puts undue stress and burden on those individuals that you may be mentoring. Don't run from the bulls. And I specifically put this here because I think sometimes that's exactly what we do. The bulls are these big, massive, overwhelming topics, subjects, these uncomfortable things that chase us all. They're there. And rather than confront them, we'll just run as if they're going to go away, right? The reality is that we have to be willing to face those challenges. We have to be willing to say, this is a hard conversation, but we need to have this conversation. I know this may be uncomfortable, but I think we'll be better, because we've all been in the situation where there's this elephant in the room and everyone's trying to maneuver around it rather than confronting and just addressing it. So in the mentoring relationships, I think it's very, very important that a lot of the things that are talked about are part of the bulls, but being willing to address and to confront and say, this is it. And to be able to say, I don't know. I am uncertain. I'm unclear. I'm uncomfortable. Can you help me a little bit? I'm going to need some time. I am I feel it, I spill it kind of guy. I'm married to someone, my wife is I need to process and think through it. It can be taxing on me because I'm waiting for her to process. It can be taxing on her because I'm expecting her now to be ready. Those are uncomfortable situations that have to be discussed, right? And all relationships require a level of trust, a level of vulnerability, time and patience. And if someone knows that your intent and you're really committed to helping them, I find that it's easier for them to give what you ask in terms of time, or understand that you are how you process. So don't run from those things that are overwhelming. I hope I'm making sense. Don't run from those things that are challenging. Don't run from those topics of racial inequality. Don't run from this. I was giving some consultation to a corporation a few years ago, and the conversation was that individuals felt that they were unseen and unheard because people kept avoiding what was going on socially. And of course, you don't want to have discussions that lead to conflict, but sometimes just to acknowledge, I see you. I can only imagine. Are you okay? Just know that if you need someone to talk to, I'm listening. I'm willing to listen. I may not know the answers, but I'm willing to do what I can to assist you. So don't run from the bulls. Don't say you're not a racist. Prove it. Just be anti-racist. Like, be engaged in the process. Speak up when you hear things that are not right. Stand. During the recent social, civil unrest in our country, I had some Anglo associates who were very silent. And they're very vocal in other areas, and they were very silent. And to one of them I said, or to some of them I said, your silence is loud. Like, you're not speaking up, you're not saying something here, is really speaking up in a different way. So it's one thing to say that I have your back, I'm with you, I don't see color, we're all in this thing together. But then when the heat is on, I need you to be with me. There are wonderful books out there. There are wonderful resources to help you be engaged. And I believe most people genuinely want to. Sometimes you don't know. And I'd rather you say to me, I want to help, I just don't know how I can help, than to say, I'm not this, because your actions speak louder than words. And I think that goes on all sides. Please understand, these are things that I believe are relevant on every side of the coin. Here's some tips, and I'm going to I think I'm about at the time where I need to take some questions. Here's some tips for having successful mentoring partnerships. I think it's important for establishment of ground rules. What are the rules? What are the things that we can and cannot touch? What are the things we are expecting? Again, this is where we're asking questions, not assuming. Discuss what those expectations are. Again, this is reciprocal. Spend time, regular time, getting to know one another. And sometimes this is challenging, but specifically in a working environment or an academic environment, because you have tasks that have to happen. But again, you're trying to build a relationship. Some vulnerability is required. What's your story? Let me share mine, you share yours. What information about those individuals in your life that have been impactful and assisted you? Describe your past relationships, both with other mentors, whether formal or informal. I encourage all mentoring relationships to have some goals, SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and timely, seem to be most productive in helping individuals move forward, right? What does success look like? What will it look like for me to have been a successful mentor to you? What is our confidentiality agreement? Like, what am I able to share with others or not? Because if you are my mentee, my protege, I have mentors. I'm a protege of someone, and sometimes I may have a question about something you had a question about, or I may be trying to find out ways to be of assistance, but I don't want to share what you don't want shared with others. So have that conversation. I encourage that. Staying on track, you have to meet regularly, whatever that looks like, whatever you're able to find. You have to set aside time to make it happen, to check in, to ask each other for your partner's perspective on how things are progressing, to evaluate the meetings and decide what you can do to make them more productive, to share insights. This is what I've learned, and I've thought about this. You said something that really helped me, that challenged me, that corrected me. Again, asking for feedback on how you're using what has been shared and how's it applicable. It helps the mentee realize the growth. It helps the protege, the mentor realize the impact or impartation that has taken place. And then being able to sit back and at any point and appropriate time, modifying your goals as needed. These are things that we all need. Okay, there's times where we have to be willing to sit back and say, that's not working. I thought I needed that, but this changed. This was my track that I was on. This was my professional goals, but now I'm looking at something different. I always ask individuals when I meet with them, how did you get to where you are? Right? Most people that I know didn't start out doing what they're doing. It's this meandering, this journey, this trial and error. This pointed me this way. I got this insight. It helps me move along. So understanding that what I need today may differ tomorrow. I hope what I've shared is helpful. Kayla, I'm open now for questions. If there are questions in the chat, if you can help me navigate those or to answer anything, I'm more than willing to do that at this time.
Amazing. Thank you, Cory. And please, everyone, round of applause. I know it's hard to get used to silent applause, but we really appreciate you, Cory. And I'm sure that what you've said has really hit home for a lot of us and then got some wheels turning for others. So we are going to take about 10 minutes for questions. I have some that are in the Padlet that I will go ahead and start asking. And then Erica, if you can help me out once we get through the Padlet questions about the chat questions, that would be awesome. So first question that we have is about understanding a mentee's culture. So it says, I'm wondering where the balance is between being intrusive in a mentee's life and the need to understand a mentee's culture in order to have a useful mentor-mentee relationship.
Very good question. I think some things I don't have to ask. I can do some research on my own. I'll give you an example. I once chastised a student. One of my students introduced me to another student who was from an African nation, new to America, came in, shook my hand, and gave what I considered to be kind of like the wet fish handshake. You know, it was just kind of really not firm. He didn't look me in my eyes, and I felt I needed to help him learn an important part. Like when you shake a man's hand, shake it firmly, look him in the eye. That's what I was taught. And so I told him, I said, hey man, shake my hand, look me in the face. Like, you know, I had a very quick like coaching up session. And then a few minutes, you know, they departed. And later that day, the young man that introduced me to the other student showed up, and he said, CP, that's what they call me, CP, he said, I want you to know, I need to tell you that he wasn't being disrespectful or trying to not give you a firm handshake. In his culture, it's inappropriate to shake an elder's hand firmly or look them in the eye. I was offended that I was called an elder because I didn't feel like I was that old. But what I misunderstood was that in that moment, the young man was trying to give me respect, and I took it as he being unprofessional. So if you're meeting someone from a different culture, you can do a little background check, you can do a little research, and that doesn't involve necessarily having to ask them and being intrusive. It's just trying to understand the dynamics of the culture, understanding. I had a staff member who was Muslim who came to me once and asked if she could go pray. And I said, sure, go pray. Like, and it was strange for me because I can pray wherever I am in my mind, right? I don't need permission to pray. But as I understood the culture, I understood there was more involved in it than just praying, you know, as was my custom with my faith. And so doing a little research, I think certainly you don't want to be intrusive. And I certainly think there are times where you have to get to know the person and build a relationship so you understand that there's trust involved and that you're really genuinely seeking to understand so that you can have a better relationship. But some of it is we just have to do our work. Sometimes we have to take a little time and do a little checking, talk to some other folks who may have had experiences with those, with someone similar, or finding out, like, as you ask the questions or you get a little information, doing a little your own research to understand what that means and how that looks. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does, Cory. We have another question from the Padlet. It says, what do you define as BIPOC? It seems that many others might define this as referring to Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Native American, maybe Pacific Islanders. But does it also relate to maybe Asians of US born or foreign born as people of color? What about somebody from the Middle East? What do we think about what categories to include in this definition?
For me personally, that's a really great question. My personal answer is yes, I do include, when I think of BIPOC, I do think of Asian, Pacific Islanders, Eastern Indians, etc., as being part of that group. I typically think of individuals who are not part of the majority American culture in terms of origin, meaning they're not Anglo, as being part of that, and there are multiple terms that can be used. It was underrepresented, underutilized, underappreciated, minoritized. So for me, I do include others. I think we have to be careful because it can almost become competitive, right? Even amongst those groups, right? African Americans feel like they're unheard. Hispanics feel they're unheard. Latinx, Latin, Asian, I can almost feel like, and then there's this whole we matter too, right? Everyone matters. We all have a right to be heard, to be seen, and to be valued. And so for my personal definition, it does include all of those groups.
Great, thank you, Cory. Another question here of incorporating what we've learned so far. How do we incorporate what we've learned about someone's culture and story into our mentoring?
I think that's a very good question, and I think it requires some careful and strategic movement. It is recognizing and saying, I see you. It is simple things, and we celebrate the holidays we celebrate because they're the holidays we celebrate. But when we're in a group, what are the holidays that everyone else can celebrate? One of the things I do when doing consulting work and going into particularly corporate settings or organization settings is, I'm from Texas. In Texas, we feel like everything is the biggest and greatest in Texas, right? And I've lived in America my entire life. I've lived in Texas my whole life. I've traveled across the country. But I had a whole different view of the world when I traveled to Italy, because Texas beauty and Italy beauty they're not the same, right? They all can be appreciated, but they're different. And so I think being deliberate and inclusive with food and music and activities we engage in, there's some learning experiences there. The celebration of holidays, like which holidays are important to you and why? What does that look like? And then trying to find ways where there's some commonalities. I think sometimes we force folks, or we attempt to force people into what is most comfortable for us rather than trying to meet people where they are. So being deliberate and intentional in the inclusiveness of conversation, of music, of movies, of activities. What do you like to do? Like what if you were home, what would this day be like for you? And recognizing that we all have our own stuff that we bring. It's like when I got married to my wife, I'm from a big family, holidays are huge. She is more a small family, and the way they do Christmas and the way we do Christmas is different. And the first time I went to do Christmas with them, I felt like a fish out of water. Then when we were married, we had this conversation of what does it look like for us as this unit, bringing some of your culture, bringing some of mine, your experiences, some of mine, your traditions, some of mine, so we create this new environment. I think it's the same when we're working with individuals in partnership or collaboration.
I wholeheartedly agree, Cory. I think it's got to be a collaboration there. And then last question from the Padlet that I see is about your point of not running from the bulls. It says, how do you suggest starting a discussion of any matter of race in our professional mentoring? Are there some actionable phrases we can use to ease into the conversation while keeping our mentees comfortable?
I think that's a very, very good question, and I think that's the step in the right direction. Acknowledging first that this is challenging. There is this bull that's chasing us, right? But you keep running, you're going to get tired, and the bull will run over you. So at some point, you have to face what you're running from and approach it. And so one of the ways that I encourage that is to be real honest and say, I want to understand from you what this means, like this means for you. What is this? What are you experiencing right now? What I am seeing is this. This is what it sounds like to me, but I want to know from you. I had a real good conversation with an older gentleman who's retired Air Force colonel during the Kaepernick, kneel, the flag, all of that stuff. And he said, I just feel like it's not the time. That's just not the time to kneel and to protest. And I said to him, when is a good time to protest? And he said, when everyone is watching. I said, okay. I'm an American, and I am proud to be an American, and I grew up singing the pledge, saying the pledge. And when I was in grade school, which is a long time ago, in the early years, we would sing, you know, my country 'tis is to thee, like every morning, and all of those things. So it was an indoctrination into this is what happens, and this is part of the process. But his view is completely different from mine. I didn't serve the country. I was not enlisted and pledged to die for this country, right? And so our perspectives were different, and so we had to agree to disagree. But we were willing to have the conversation. I gained a greater appreciation for his perspective. I believe he gained a greater appreciation for mine. And sometimes we just agree to disagree. But being willing to at least share where you stand and what your perspective is, in my opinion, opens the door for learning, opens the door for growing, and in my opinion, it also strengthens the trust.
Great. And do we have any questions from the chat, Eric? I think we have time for one more.
Great. There was one question in the chat. That question was, how do we begin to grasp, this from Elijah, sorry. How do we begin to grasp a mentee's experience / background? Should mentors be asking questions directed at these topics? Because many experiences or biases are not superficial and cannot be seen on a resume or an application or in an interview. These questions to me sound difficult to ask early on in a mentor-mentee relationship. So how can we balance invasiveness with our attempts to understand?
Very good question, very complex question. And honestly, there is no quick answer. If I'm real honest with you, it is as you go. That there are some things that's going to take time to comprehend, to embrace, to appreciate, to understand. It's a willingness. It's like being willing to stay engaged. Like I want to, you know, it's like in any other relationship. I have a best friend. We've been friends since first grade. There are some things that I struggle to talk to him about, and we've known each other since first grade. We've slept in each other's house. His mom is like my mom is like his mom. Our families are connected, all of that. I still sometimes have to take some time and consider how, and I think this, we all do this, like I test you with a little something, and how you respond to the little tells me whether I can tell you the big.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just being real honest. Sometimes it's doing a little test, do a little trial, see how that went over. Yeah. But being willing, like I'm here, and if I establish there are some questions or some subjects, no matter how you phrase it, are just going to be hard. So being willing to recognize this is challenging for me. I know it's going to be challenging for you, but I really want to know this. How can you help me? if we have the basis of trust and appreciation and respect, and that I see you and I'm seeking to better understand you, I think that starts as the basis, the foundation upon which things can be built. And it's a gradual process. Some topics you can't come out quick and ask questions. Like, you have to check them out, see how they handle things. Understanding that I'm a very extroverted person, and when you're interacting with rather introverted persons, you gotta put yourself in their shoes, right? And do a little role play with someone else who can help you prepare for that. I'm good at running things past others. Okay, I really need to say this, but how do I say this? And I have a really good mentor who will, like, if I'm writing something, I'm trying to refute or rebut, she'll say, now that you got that out of your system, now let's rephrase it like this. And I appreciate it because she keeps me out of trouble. And if I did it my normal way, it would probably come off real abrasive and unproductive. It would be unproductive. So sometimes it's a matter of seeking others to help you and reading the room, like just kind of feeling where they are. And it may not be the time today. We'll get there if we keep moving along.